President Barack called me from the White House to congratulate me on becoming the first Chinese American woman elected to Congress in history. And I thought, wow, that is amazing.
Hello, Congresswoman Chu. Thank you so much for joining us today. So excited to welcome you to today's episode of Pizza and Politics. Given our current situation with COVID-19, we're unable to offer you pizza, but we'd like to start off with today's interview by asking you, when is the best time to have pizza?
Well, I just love it for dinner. There's nothing like having a wonderful piece of pizza to just relax over.
I have to agree.
Same here. But now moving on into the more political sides and jumping right in, could you tell us about what initially incentivized your involvement in politics? And was there any specific experience that you had that significantly influenced your decision to become a politician?
Well, I have to say that growing up, I never ever thought that I would be an elected official. It was not even within my realm of possibilities, mostly because I never saw anybody who looked like me who was in an elected office. So I thought I would be a computer scientist. Then I thought I would become a psychologist. I did become a psychologist, but actually, I only did that to serve people. I never thought that I would ever take this route. But then an issue happened in the city I was living in, the city of Monterey Park. There was a very ugly anti-immigrant movement happening there. It was an English-only movement. You see, many new immigrants were moving into the city, and there was a reaction against them. And so the residents were trying to get English only on the signs in the city, English only books in the library. The last straw was when they had a resolution passed that said that only English should be spoken in the city. So a multi-ethnic group of us got together. We got thousands of signatures on petitions, and we got that resolution overturned. However, it became very, very apparent that the makeup of the city council did not reflect the city. So that's when I ran for city council, and I did get that seat. I served for 13 years. From there, I got elected to the California State Assembly and ultimately here in Congress.
Yeah, that's a really interesting background story. I always love to hear like how people first got involved into politics. So starting off with more of your background, we know that you started your career in politics as an educator and also a school board member. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that experience and how your time in education has influenced what you've done throughout the years?
Well, one of the most formative experiences of my life was my 20 years teaching in the Los Angeles Community College District. I taught students who came from all backgrounds, who were the first in their families to go to college, who were refugees, who were immigrants, who were from low-income neighborhoods. And it was just tremendous to see how they were going to community college to get a chance in life, a chance to be a somebody in life, and to do it with an education that would not cost very much. And that's what I think is the beauty of the community college education, that it doesn't cost very much. In fact, in California, at one time, it was totally free. And I hope we can return that to that kind of situation soon. But I had students that were, well, really inspirational. For instance, Socorro Ortiz is a student I'll never forget. She was when I was teaching at East LA College. She was in my psychology class. And she was the one of the most eager and brightest students that I had. As she was from Mexico, and it was amazing how responsive she was and how much she understood about what I was saying about psychology. And then she told me a story. She was on welfare. She had 3 children. She wanted to make something of her life. She read the textbook in the library because she didn't have enough money to buy the textbooks. She would scratch out her papers on notebook paper because she didn't have a computer. But she was persistent. Her papers were all A's. She got an A in the class. She went on to get her associate degree, then her bachelor's, and she then went on to graduate education. And I think to myself, this is what a chance at an education will get you.
Thank you for telling us all of that. But now moving on, onto our current matters, you were actually the first ever Chinese woman to be elected to Congress in history. We would absolutely love to hear about your campaign experience and what that historic milestone means to you.
So it wasn't easy to get to the state level and to the congressional level. Now, even though it was difficult in the city of Monterey Park because of all the racial polarization and the anti-immigrant English-only movement, at least you could talk to people on a personal level. When you're running in a local office, you can knock on each door and have a conversation with each person. But when you try to get to the state and the federal level, then you really need powerful people or powerful groups to back you. And I didn't have that because there wasn't anything in place like that for Asian American women like me at that time. So there was an Old Boys Network, and the Old Boys Network chose somebody to be their person when a state seat opened up, a state assembly seat opened up. And because of that, all the powerful groups were going towards that person, my opponent. So things looked very bleak. And then an important thing happened, and that's when then Congressmember Hilda Solis decided to support me. And she did it because she'd gone against the Old Boys Network herself. She tried to run for Congress against a longtime entrenched incumbent. And in the most miraculous of campaigns, she won. And she never forgot what it took. She turned around and supported me. That gave me the support I needed. So I actually won that state assembly seat, which then gave me the ability, the visibility to then make it to Congress. And so, yes, I got elected to Congress. And what I will never forget is the day after I won, because President Barack called me from the White House to congratulate me on becoming the first Chinese American woman elected to Congress in history. And I thought, wow, that is amazing.
Yeah, that's really inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. So, talking more about legislation, in 2012, you played a vital role in Asian American history by introducing and passing a congressional resolution that showed regret for the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. Could you talk to us a bit about that and what it meant to you?
So the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 was one of the most discriminatory laws ever passed by Congress. It was the only law to exclude people from this country solely based on their race. It prevented the Chinese from becoming naturalized citizens, primarily so that it could stop them from voting and having a voice in this country. It forced the Chinese to carry papers on them at all times. And if they didn't have those papers, then they could be deported, even if they were legally in the country. And only the testimony of a white person could save them from being deported, because the testimony of Chinese people was not considered valid in court. So you could see that there was a lot of prejudice. And guess how long this lasted? 60 long years. It didn't end until 1943. And the only reason there was because China demanded it in order to have an alliance with the US in the precursor to World War II. So when I got elected, a coalition of national Chinese American groups came to me and said, will you lead the effort to have an apology for what happened during the Chinese Exclusion Act period? And I said, yes, I had to do it because there'd never been an official apology by Congress for disenfranchising an entire ethnic group of people for 60 long years. So I embarked on this very difficult journey because there are not that many people that even know what it is. So we had to go around explaining to everybody what it was and how it harmed people. You can imagine very few Congress members knew what it was. So it took quite a bit of effort, but finally in 2012, there was a unanimous resolution that passed in both the Senate and in the House expressing regret for the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882.
Now, moving on to the congressional side of things, you chair the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. Could you tell us a little bit about what that is and what your role is?
Yes, the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus is the voice for Chinese Americans and Asian Americans and all Asian Americans in Congress. Now, let me say that there was a time when there were no Asian Americans in Congress. And that is why the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 was able to pass. That's why they were able to take Japanese Americans and imprison them during World War II. Those voices weren't there for a long, long time. And so when Asian Americans started finally being elected to Congress, it was very important for them to gather in a caucus. Now, when it began, there were only 3, but now there are 21 AAPI members of Congress. So we have truly been able to increase our numbers. And we are working on all kinds of things. We are working right now on the effort to stop AAPI hate. And this has been going on for an entire year, ever since the coronavirus started. But it especially got bad when Donald Trump started calling it China virus, Wuhan virus, and Kung flu, because it then focused all the hatred on Asian Americans in this country. That's when Asian Americans started being assaulted, punished, even murdered. And then it got even worse this year as more elderly and vulnerable Asian Americans were attacked. And then the absolute worst was when the 8 people were shot in Georgia, with 6 of them being Asian women. So we've done all kinds of things, from press conferences, letters, legislation, hearings, meetings with top officials. And talk about legislation, finally, we got a COVID-19 hate crimes bill passed in the Senate. It was just 2 weeks ago. And now that bill goes to the House in May. We expect it to pass, and then we expect it to be signed into law by President Biden.
All right, so now moving on towards more the environmental side. As a member of the Sustainable Energy and Environment Coalition, what have been some of the largest environmental issues you've noticed, and what contributions have you made to help solve these issues?
First and foremost, we have a climate change crisis. If we don't do something about this, our planet is in trouble, and we've got to do it now. We have to lay the groundwork now. So that's why we have to take actions to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So you know that we are passing an American Jobs Plan, a big infrastructure bill. But what is a very important part of it is to provide the funds and the incentives to change our system, our whole energy system, so that it is based on renewables. So we have to make sure that we have clean energy, tax incentives for all kinds of things, but actually I am working on tax incentives for renewable and electric vehicles. I also support a carbon tax. I think there should be a tax on those companies that still use fossil fuels or carbon, in other words, and then take the money that comes from that and give it back to the people as a dividend. So it's a carbon tax and dividend bill. I also am working on a sustainable environment. That's why I've been working for years to increase protections for the San Gabriel Mountains. This has been my entire decades worth of work. And that is, the San Gabriel Mountains are a beautiful part of Los Angeles County. And they can provide hiking and fishing and all kinds of natural opportunities for LA County, which is so dense and urban, but within a 90-minute drive. But the San Gabriel Mountains were allowed to deteriorate with few resources. So that's why I tried to get as many resources as possible. The first step was getting President Obama to declare the San Gabriel Mountains a national monument. So this was fantastic because it provided resources immediately to clean up the area, to get people up there to manage it, and to provide new resources. But now I'm continuing my journey, and I introduced a bill, the San Gabriel Mountains, Rivers, and Foothills and Rivers Protection Act, which would provide a national recreation area for that entire foothill cities portion and for the rivers that come down from the mountains. And it would also preserve wilderness that's deep in the mountains.
So before we finish this interview, we want to cover one more topic, which essentially is our organization, which is about youth in government. So what do you think the first steps that students interested in politics should take to begin immersing themselves in civic life?
The main thing is to keep involved, to be informed, to do things like what you are doing now, figuring out what the main issues are and following up on those issues. And I tell you, having classes that can open up your mind is so important. I actually never thought that I'd be in elected office. I told you that, but I must tell you the thing that opened up my mind was an Asian American Studies class I took in my first quarter in Congress. I mean, first quarter, I'm saying, in college. And it opened up my mind in terms of what historical discrimination had taken place in this country. I never knew. And I never knew that they were actually put into place by Congress, by our lawmakers in this land. That taught me such an important lesson, that it is human beings who make the laws of this land, and it is human beings that can change the laws of this land. So being exposed to those ideas, being exposed to what's gone on in the past really helps. And so I hope that you can get engaged, that young people can get engaged in whichever way possible. And that would be in doing internships. It would be volunteering in community organizations, but also in campaigns. Then you can see the whole range of what happens in this country and how people work to make change.
Yeah, thank you so much for that insight. And finally, since we are discussing ways for youth to be involved, why do you think it's important for today's youth to be engaged and involved in politics and our government?
Well, you are our future. You are the ones who will be our policy is. And I sure hope that we have people like you in our future government that are informed and that want to do the right thing, that want to make sure that this is a just and equal society, that this will be a society that will be there for all of us, where we can all breathe because of our efforts to fight climate change, where we can make sure that everybody has a chance to succeed, so that we have good policies like paid family leave um, and a chance to have debt-free college, things that will make sure everybody has a chance in life. I just hope that you are able to have your input into our government and make this a better government that serves all of us.